Okay, we're going to get rolling here when talking on the innovation panel. And I'm really excited today to have two guests here that we're going to be talking about specifically some new innovation and technology here in Colorado. I'll just go first by introducing myself. My name is Stacey Sims. I'm the Senior Director at CalStart. CalStart is a global nonprofit really focused in on the zero emission transportation sector. We are made up of member organizations. We have more than 300 members in the entire ecosystem of zero emission transportation. I'm lucky enough to lead a team of 5 different types of teams focusing on infrastructure. And I'm really excited to moderate this conversation today. So I'm going to pass it around. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself real quick, say who you're with, and a little bit about the company, and then we'll dive more into that after we do our intros.
Hi, everybody. My name is Charles Yhap. I'm CEO and co-founder of CalStart. I'm a serial entrepreneur. At CalStart, we have a novel way to break down electric vehicle batteries and post-consumer electronics batteries without the risk of fire and explosions.
Christopher Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of SunTrain. We move batteries over the freight rail network, which is simulating how coal trains once moved utility scale energy around the United States.
All right, so thank you both for introducing yourselves, and I'm going to actually then work back around this way. So, Christopher, if you could take 3 to 5 minutes, talk a little bit about what your company is doing, what problems you're trying to solve, and just what you would want people to know about what you're trying to do with SunTrain.
Sure. I'll have to give some context first because approaching the idea of moving batteries over the freight rail network might seem a little ridiculous when you come at it from far away. But I'd like to provide that between the years 1950 and 2005, 50% of all the energy that was being generated on an annual basis for our electrical grid came from coal. 97% of that coal was delivered by the railroads. In the year 2026, the coal train is starting to go extinct. Less than 17% of all the energy that goes onto our grid now is coming from coal power. That's a big change. But what that means is all of the electricity that was going to our grid was once moving on the rail network. Now that that energy is going away, it's putting an enormous burden on our transmission lines because all of that energy that was moving outside of the wire is needing to go back onto the wire. So what we've done is we figured out how to move electricity as a raw commodity over the freight rail network with our proprietary battery rail cars. And this is nothing new for the railroads because the railroads already move fundamentally every form of energy that we use in bulk: natural gas, oil, ethanol, biomass, spent nuclear waste, of course, coal. Even more niche energies are starting to come online, like hydrogen. So moving electricity over the freight rail network is nothing new. We're using a specialty rail car that keeps our batteries safe. But the main thing that we're doing is we are trying to mimic coal logistics in every single way. Our trains are the same weight and the same length as coal trains, so they're anywhere from 10,000 tons to 15,000 tons. They are 10,000 feet long, and they are also moving gigawatt hours of electricity. The coal train, after you correct for thermodynamic electrical losses at a coal plant, delivers about 10 gigawatt hours. Our trains and our first generation deliver 2 gigawatt hours. They deliver electricity directly to the grid, either via substations or we love defunct coal power plants. A defunct coal power plant has the existing rail infrastructure. It has the existing transformers, the existing substation, the PUC approval to operate, the proper zoning, and more often than not, a local community that is desperate to get back into the same industry they're already working in, which was the energy space. So we are using the coal logistics of yesteryear, repurposing the railroads to move electricity, using those stranded assets to allow renewable energy to come back onto our grid and solve the 300,000-mile transmission line shortage that is really hurting the generation capacity of the United States in its current iteration of energy.
That was awesome. Awesome. That was fantastic. And I love how you are literally building in the next generation or what we need into the existing infrastructure that we have. So I have a lot more questions about that, and I'd love to we're going to dig more into that here in a minute. But I'd love to pass it over and talk a little bit about how you're using. I looked you up, got a little bit of information. I hadn't heard of this process before, and I'm fascinated. So talk a little bit about how you want to revolutionize the idea of battery recycling and really ensuring that kind of life cycle how do I want to say it? The life cycle continuation.
Sure, sure. So I think it makes sense to start with a little context for our business as well. Start with the obvious. Batteries are very volatile. They catch fire and they explode all the time. If you talk to any recycler that's sitting on any amount of batteries, they lose sleep over the sizzle that they hear in the back room. I was speaking with a recycler just last week. I asked them, how many fires have you had in the last year? He laughed and said we had 5 just last week. So this is a constant problem. What Cold Spark is able to do is reduce that volatility by making things very, very, very cold. And we have kind of a couple stages to that process. And without revealing too much, once they're cold, we're able to shred them and break them down without the risk of fire and explosions. Some innovative things about this particular process is that we can make it very, very compact, which makes it very capital light, and it takes hardly any people to run. A very small team can run it with high safety, high efficiency. So it's CapEx light and OpEx light. And what that allows us to do is decentralize our systems. Traditionally, the paradigm around battery recycling is it takes billions of dollars to build a massive centralized facility, and then those batteries have to get shipped from around the country to wherever that centralized location is. The trouble is that 60% of the cost to recycle electric vehicle batteries is just in the transportation of those still fully assembled batteries. So by making our facilities CapEx light, OpEx light, and decentralized, we're able to get close to those points of battery aggregation, break them down into what's called black mass, which is basically a shredded battery. It's much more stable, not volatile in that state, and then that can be shipped around at a much cheaper cost.
I love it. All right, I'm going to come back with you some specific questions. My understanding is that uh, you are Colorado based, and you're
Yep.
looking at Colorado here. Why does Colorado make sense for you as kind of the eco start?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Colorado has a lot of interesting things for us. Number one, Colorado's a leader in recycling innovation and policy. Uh, there's some new EV battery recycling policy making its way through, and my understanding is that if it makes it through, it's going to be ahead of pretty much any other state and might serve as the model for other states in the country. Colorado also ranks fairly high in terms of electric vehicle adoption. It's below some others, but some of the others have a lot of regulations that make it difficult for us to get started there. And frankly, I don't think we could survive that process. But Colorado has that going for it. And there's also, in my opinion, a really strong environmental streak and temperament in Colorado that serves us well in starting the operation here.
So it sounds like you have the culture. It sounds like you have the product. It sounds like you have the regs. It sounds like the perfect ecosystem to start really working on what you hope will become a national movement.
Absolutely. And, there's some other great things. There's a fantastic rail network here, a good highway network, and good infrastructure for this type of operation.
You like literally set up the next question that I have, so that was fantastic. So, Christopher, as we're talking about the rail and we're talking about Colorado, you and I spoke earlier before about some specific work that you are thinking about would make sense for Colorado, but why Colorado? And kind of what do you think about the rail system here, or what do you think the opportunities are for the state?
Well, not to be de minimis to Colorado, but Colorado chose me. Excel Energy approached us and said, "Hey, we heard about your technology.
That's even better. Even better.
We have a world of opportunity by way of plenty of defunct coal power plants and a sprawling rail network that is populated by more than one rail carrier, which is important. Both Union Pacific and BNSF serve Colorado pretty heartily, so that makes things a lot easier for us. And then, of course, Excel has a world of defunct coal power plants, and they are decommissioning more every year. As mentioned previously, defunct coal power plants are something that we love. And also, Colorado has an immense amount of renewables that are much more distant as compared to where the coal power plants are. But that's helpful because that rail network also touches these regions where the energy is being generated. The east side, the southeast corners, the southern parts of the state are only growing with their renewable energy generation by way of wind and solar and soon even geothermal. But there's huge capacity issues on their transmission lines that mean they cannot get that energy to where it needs to go. Excel spent about 20 years trying to get that 550-mile transmission line built, which is currently under construction. And assuming all things go to plan, it should be done in 2027, 2028. But even that transmission line is only solving a fraction of the issues of the transmission line issues that we're having. So this place is the perfect storm of having renewable energy generation that's stranded, having a great rail network, having the right attitudes, as you mentioned, to wanting to push this forward, and having a utility that is very progressive and aggressive, I should say, as well, and going out and solving problems.
Yeah, I love hearing that as an ex Excel Energy uh, employee and staffer. I love hearing how all of that is continuing, and companies like both of yours are um, in a position because of the leadership from Excel Energy. So that's great to hear. And Christopher, I'm going to stay with you. So thinking about how this has been beneficial to Excel, they reached out to you, and obviously it makes sense in terms of helping move electrons, right? Railroads already doing that. How do we move more of those electrons to be green electrons and really make sure that we're getting renewable um, generation to its fullest potential? I'm curious what you think might be the next 3 to 5 years in Colorado if you are able to scale up. What does that look like in terms of the types of jobs you could see coming to Colorado? And be ready because I'm going to ask you the same question too, Charles.
So, if any particular region or state like Colorado truly opens up its full generating potential, it brings in a world of new development, independent power producers, utilities, and then it also brings in new opportunities for those who are consuming large amounts of energy. We all know the data center and AI world, but also recyclers. You guys are going to consume a lot of energy to go through your processes. It brings in new opportunities for generation and for those who are going to actually be using that energy. So it should drive creation of jobs holistically across both those markets. Internally, yes, it'll drive the internal jobs at, say, the electricians union, things like that, the operators, the maintainer of these types of systems. But generally speaking, if this is successful and it scales in the way that we're hoping it should bring in a whole new line of work and a whole new line of opportunities that would drive significant growth to the employment market here in Colorado in the industries and trade.
Yeah. So job creation in Colorado. There was something I haven't mentioned about our decentralized approach. So in the future, we want to containerize our technology so that it becomes semi-mobile. So not just decentralized, but we're able to move it around. And the reason that's significant is because it opens up a licensing business model approach. One of the things that I worry about with the energy transition is that you're really going to see the usual suspects making most of the profit, most of the money. With a licensing approach, it's my hope that we'll be able to empower smaller entrepreneurs to really benefit from that energy transition, especially at the end of life or at the end of life of the battery cycle. So in terms of kind of like the three phases that I'm thinking about, in the early stages, job creation is really going to be around engineering and technical development. Then we're going to have technicians that will be operating plants. And then in kind of the third phase, we'll be looking at a new generation of entrepreneurs benefiting from battery recycling, recovery of these critical rare earth minerals that are so strategically important for this country, and the jobs that will support those operations, which will be primarily technicians, logistics, and even back office stuff, accounting, lawyers, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. And you both did a really good job in explaining what problems you're trying to solve on the market. And I think understanding too also how that can lead to additional benefits, job creation, more renewables, entrepreneurship, all of that is fantastic. I hate to go back to it, but what are the barriers in terms of regulatory issues, if any, that you're facing? Anytime that we're talking about innovation and new tech, and whether you're coming into an existing infrastructure or you're trying to recreate it in a new way, there's always something that's getting in your way. So what is the top regulatory, the top barrier that's kind of in your way right now? And I'll go back. I'll have you go first there, Charles.
Sure. That is an interesting question. I would say what I'm thinking about from a regulatory perspective is that there isn't a whole lot of regulation on electric vehicle extended producer responsibility, let's call it.
Yeah.
Yet. And it's coming, it's evolving, and it's happening quickly. And what I'm concerned about is really a patchwork of regulations across the country that make it very difficult to manage operations. It would be better, in my opinion, to have one rule set or one model either coming from the federal government as opposed from 50 different states that just become very difficult to manage. I would say there's a lot of Department of Transportation regulations that make it difficult to ship batteries around, and that's part of the value proposition that we're bringing. But even so, uh, I would I would encourage the Department of Transportation to revisit those rules in light of new and emerging technologies, new and emerging chemistries that might make it more affordable and just as safe for the industry to perform its material recovery responsibilities.
Is it fair to say that the regs that they're set up now does not and cannot easily understand your tech and understand how it meets or exceeds what the safety standards would be? Does it, and I guess another way to say this is for both of you, is there a lot of education that needs to go into this to have those regulators understand that maybe as the regulation is set up now, either it doesn't really pertain to you, or yeah, we already do this in a day to day. This isn't even a concern of ours.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think education might help. It might also just be an artifact of bureaucratic hostility to any change, to phrase it diplomatically, or maybe not diplomatically at all. But that seems to be the real problem, is just some organizational inertia and unwillingness to revisit emerging technologies that could increase safety while reducing regulatory burden.
Yeah, that's fair. I think everyone that's out there on the innovation side would agree with you. So, Christopher, back to you then, and thinking about, so you're talking about essentially using regs, using, I heard you say, like, we're meeting the same weight, we're using the same structure, we're really trying to put this into an existing framework. Are there any regulatory issues or burdens that would keep you from, being able to scale up?
Well, there used to be. We spent the last 6 years working through each and every one of those, going through the tests, demonstrating our technology, making sure that they understood it was safe, that we run with fire suppression systems, we have an emergency response plan, we're properly placarded for the rail. Then we also had to fall in line with all of the utility standards or the wholesale energy market standards, which means conforming to UL listings, IEEE listings, getting our energy into the format that the grid wants, working on day-ahead or real-time markets, or working under utilities using traditional project finance vehicles and energy offtake agreements. We kind of built the company upside down by way of, we were thinking of all the scale and all the regulatory frameworks that are existing that we have to fit into. Because if you have to try to reinvent the wheel, whether that's on the railroad side or the utility side, then you're going to spend 10 to 15 years in R&D in trying to change legislation, regulation, and the authority having jurisdictions that have an immense amount of power over you and generally don't want to move. So we made sure that this idea was entirely congruent and compatible with what already exists. So we are now entirely turnkey and able to execute right now. The only thing that we're running into is that to execute in the P3 space, the public-private partnership arena, which is working with utilities and wholesale energy markets, we just have to have our first deployment out, like our first scaled project. And scaled is more or less is a definitional word. That doesn't mean we have to be running giant trains. Just a handful of rail cars will suffice. And that's where we are now, and those are the pilots that we are looking to move forward on with Excel through their Just Transition Solution RFP, as well as other pilot projects around the United States.
I love how you said that we really built this upside down and saying, how do we build the tech within the structure that's always there, so that we're not spending 10 years in R&D and spending, and I've been there, thousands and thousands of hours trying to educate someone on a different way of doing it when everything is against you in essentially establishing that. So I love how you said that. And you brought it up, so I'll ask you, when you think about what does 2030 look like and getting to a scale here, and we're in Colorado, so talking about Colorado, what does that look like for you? So if you were to say, all right, by 2030, I want it to look like X, Y, and Z for SunTrain. I'm sure you have that vision. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
By 2030, we'd be expecting to have our first fully scaled project, which would be 2 unit trains, 2 10,000 plus foot trains carrying each about 2 gigawatt hours of energy, operating on a daily basis. That includes going through the Excel IRP process, going through an RFP process, going through PUC approval process. That's all baked into that. That would get us through those processes. That would get us through a small pilot where we make sure the technology is up to snuff, where we make sure that the round trip efficiency is there, all that component. And then this would rapidly scale into a multi-billion-dollar undertaking. So through all of that, it would take us through about 2030, where we would see our first fully scaled project operating and demonstrating to the world that electricity as a raw commodity on the rail network is not only immediately available, but it's something that can open up a lot of doors for opportunities in the energy space.
I love that. And think about the next question I'm going to come back to you is just tell us operationally how that looks like from getting it from rail to onto the grid. So think about that. And then, Charles, I'm going to come back to you. So what does it look like in thinking about 2030 as you envision scaling up inside of Colorado? Give us that vision. What does it look like?
Yeah, by 2030, thinking good thoughts, we'd like to be working with our first licensee on one or multiple containerized lines that are moving basically autonomously in terms of taking in feedstock, chilling it, shredding it, doing some separation of the constituent commodities and deploying it, and building a repeatable process so that we could deploy other licensable containerized solutions to other partners across the country.
Awesome. And so I'm going to come back to you, but be ready to talk about who you think the offtake of the products will be. But Christopher, gave you a second to think about it. So talk us, and I know you can do this in in your sleep, but just talk about what does it look like? You have, from endpoint to endpoint, talk a little bit about what is the steps, what does it take, and then what type of investment Excel might need to have at their generation station to be able to use the energy that you're bringing to them.
All right, let's start on the technology side. So each one of our rail cars is able to hold 17.2 megawatt hours. We're using iron phosphate batteries, which is uniquely different than the chemistries you're likely dealing with. The reason I bring that up is because iron phosphate is much safer and more stable than your traditional lithium-ion chemistries that you find in electric vehicles and many consumer products. But we still have to have those batteries safe. And these are also very heavy batteries, so we cannot be taking them off the rail cars. We developed proprietary technology that allows these batteries to exist for at least 20 years over the freight rail environment without taking any sort of damage or requiring large amounts of overhaul. And additionally, we invented proprietary charging and discharging systems that allow us to get that energy, that electricity on and off the rail car in an automated fashion that pretty much uses no human labor. Now, we weren't trying to remove the human labor, but to get 100 rail cars connected to a giant system that allows 2 gigawatt hours to discharge in either 2 or 4 hours requires a lot of cabling. So we had to develop something around that. The way this works is twofold. If we are doing an Excel energy project, right, we are moving between 2 existing points of interconnection. A pragmatic project we've been looking at is actually moving energy from the soon-to-be decommissioned Comanche generating station, which is a grid region that is awash with frequently curtailed renewable energy because there's a ton of curtailed solar and wind down there. We would capture that energy from the substation that's already existing at that coal power plant, meaning we'd be using the rail that's already there. We'd be reusing the substation, and all we would be installing is our charging and discharging system that would get us directly from the collector station, the 13.8 kV collector station at that substation, so we can charge our trains. That train then overnight would relocate itself outside of Denver to the old Arapahoe generating station, which is completely defunct. All that exists there is the rail and the substation. There's no other legacy coal infrastructure there. The train would then discharge to that location, thus making SunTrain effectively an entirely mobile transmission line.
What would be needed at the Arapahoe site?
Just the rail cars and our charging and discharging system. We may have to do some minor redevelopment of the industry track, which is like the private track that's railroad track that's inside the industry. One way I like to explain how railroads work is it's like how you have a driveway that you can park your car on, right? That's what every industry has. That's what the railroad drops the rail cars off at. But then the railroads itself are like the interstate or the roadways. They own that. They operate that. They handle all the traffic on it. So there may be some redevelopment of the track required internally, both within Arapahoe, maybe even some in Comanche, depending on how we actually handle the final logistics. But really, all that we're putting in is just the balance of system equipment, which is some switch gear, some electrical panels, some disconnects, and our charging and discharging system. So in the grand scheme of things, it's a really minimal amount of infrastructure that we have to put in, which is just that connection point between our rail cars and the substation, which, as our final thought, is massive, because there may be one day where the grid catches up, which means all of our infrastructure that we've put in there is obsolete. But the good news is the vast majority of that infrastructure is on a rail car, which means it can be rolled right out of there and reassigned to other projects. So we no longer have to run the risk of having a multi-billion-dollar stranded asset as our grid updates and changes.
You just put it in a place where it has the constraints, where it has the renewables that are available. They already have the infrastructure. They already are moving, like you said, they're already moving the BTUs. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, Charles, over to you. Thank you. That was really, I was visioning it out, and I can see how that works now. Charles, so when we think about what you're doing and how you're working through to have a stable product that goes out to the market for, the reuse and recycle of battery, who do you think the offtakes are? Where do you see your product ultimately ending?
Yeah, great question. So it gets a little technical, and I'll try to keep it high level. So what we're producing is called black mass. There's no official industry definition of black mass. There's different flavors of it, but it's essentially shredded batteries that have been pulverized. Our process allows us to get to that pulverization component faster and more safely. And it's a commodity like copper or iron that's traded to the tune of millions of tons annually. So the off-takers are folks that are already in the market for black mass. Most of the off-takers today are in Asia. There's some in Europe. There really isn't refinement capability in the United States yet. That capability is developing. There's a lot of government money going into it, ostensibly. The Trump administration also recently announced Project Vault, which is supposed to stockpile a certain amount of critical minerals and rare earth metals for about 30 days worth of reserve. And there's billions of dollars going into that. But the off-takers already exist. There's a short list of folks that we're already in contact with for today's product. And as the U.S. capability to refine black mass develops, we'll obviously be looking at those off-takers as well.
That's awesome. And thinking about, and I didn't know, I'm learning everything on this, learning a lot on this panel here. There's things I didn't even know. I didn't know there was a whole commodity section for black mass. And I have heard about the constraints that we have in the U.S. for being able to really make sure that we're having a beneficial use out of the battery. So that's fantastic. When we think about, and Charles, I'm going to start with you. We'll work back over. So you mentioned a little bit about, establishing partnerships and working with, people who see this as a commodity and being able to take it off. What other areas or what other sectors do you think maybe kind of on the outside, not really in your wheelhouse right now in terms of being an offtake? Where do you think maybe the next customer might come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. Feedstock that my co-founder and I talk a lot about is electronic waste. There's obviously, so separate from the batteries and electronic waste, PCBs, computers, that sort of thing. There's a lot of valuable minerals there. Copper has a very mature market. We have partners to extract that. Gold is another one. And then there's some other rare earths that are in smaller quantities that are also very exciting, because even at small quantities, it's very valuable if you can extract it. Another commodity that gets me really excited is graphite. It's like $120,000 a ton, but it's because it's very light and there's not a lot of it inside of batteries or electronic waste by volume. But if you can get enough of it, it's a really valuable thing to be able to extract.
Fantastic. Really, really interesting. Did not know that. That's great. That whole nother world here that is tied to what we're doing in zero emission, in the zero emission sector. Christopher, I want to ask you. So thinking about the same kind of question, being in the zero emission transportation space, really focused on infrastructure, I hear all the time how there are specific site constraints, right? That, someone wants and needs 3 megawatts of power, utility saying we got to build a substation to get you to the 30 megawatts that you want in 5 years. a lot of those folks do have some type of rail or close to rail. I'm thinking ports, dry and wet. Um, any thought about maybe also looking at being a kind of a direct energy supplier to any of those?
Yeah, I see you're going with that question. So the first type of project we talked about was moving between existing points of interconnection, like a defunct coal power plant to a defunct coal power plant kind of a deal, or to a reasonably adjacent grid substation to another grid substation, for example. But what we can also do is we have already convinced developers to start locating their new generation, their unbuilt generation sources around rail access rather than the transmission grid. Our transmission grid system in America is hopelessly constrained, which is why we have 2,600 gigawatts of projects stalled in the interconnection queue. Everyone says, well, we'll just build more transmission lines, but we have a 300,000 mile transmission line shortage. We're building less than 1,000 miles a year, and the difficulty is getting right of way. Nobody wants right of way going through their backyard or going through their farm or anything like that, making it extremely difficult for utilities to build this. But we have rail that's sprawling all over the country. Railroads have been around for over 200 years, and they were mainly built well over 100 years ago, which means that we don't have to have these kinds of fights, which means that there's an abundance of land, millions upon millions of acres that are adjacent to rail, but not adjacent to the transmission grid. So what we can start telling our developers to do is site around that. That land is going to be cheaper. It's going to have less NIMBYism. Unfortunately, it's probably also going to have less environmental constraints as well. It's just going to mean that we're going to be able to site projects around rail that much faster, and then SunTrain brings that energy to market. That's how we're going to go about doing that.
I love it. I love it. And just being mindful of time, I'd say we probably have about 5 to 7 minutes left. I just want to leave it open. I want to let you both talk a little bit more about your vision, ask questions of each other, kind of have this a little bit unscripted so that you can just make sure that folks who are listening in understand where you're going, your vision, what you need, and how to get in touch with you.
Chris, kudos on choosing iron phosphate. It's a very smart decision. I'm curious to know what was there an aha moment that made you think rail network is the way to grow the energy grid, because of all the all the obstacles that you articulated with like wiring and transmission.
I don't get asked this question enough, and it's actually a pretty good one. During the depths of COVID, I was locked in my shoebox-sized apartment in San Francisco, and I decided to move to Alaska to try to ride out COVID. There is all of one railroad in Alaska, and it moves between Anchorage and Fairbanks. And on one particular day, hiking over Giant Mountain Pass, I actually saw this single rail line operating train. And I was just observing it because I was blown away by how many energy products they had on that train. They had coal, they had wood, because apparently they deliver burnable wood for the winter. They had what looked like natural gas. They had all sorts of things on it, but they were all energy products. Now, one part of the train that started going by, I identified as batteries because they are 20-foot and 40-foot shipping containers. And since my brain thinks of 20 and 40-foot shipping containers as batteries because I'm from the energy development space, my background with the electricians union has me thinking that a battery is the only thing that could possibly be inside a 20 and 40-foot shipping container. So I got really excited, and I thought, wow, these Alaskan guys are genius. They figured out that they can move stored electricity around their freight rail network. Of course, as soon as I started researching this, I found out that nobody is moving batteries over their freight rail network. But it was at that moment that I knew that they could. And that's what led me to do my research on the railroads and realize that, hey, as the coal train's going extinct, we needed to find a new energy source to put back on the railroad so we could solve this energy constraint that the United States has been facing. So that's how I got to the rail idea. And then, of course, there was no way we'd be able to run nickel, manganese, cobalt, or any of those legacy lithium ion chemistries on there, because in the event of a derailment, that would be catastrophic. It'd make that East Palestine train thing from a couple years ago look like a picnic in comparison. So that was an easy choice too.
It would still be burning if that happened.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and being from Ohio in that area, like that would be real. Like
Yeah.
again.
Yep.
Yeah. So how about you? I'm going to ask you the question. Like, how did you get inspired? Like, what brought you to that?
Oh,
To
yeah.
what you're doing now?
Good question. So I'm a serial
You
entrepreneur.
asked the question, by the way.
Yeah,
Asked it of him.
it's a great question,
You.
Charles. Yeah. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. The company I was running before Cold Spark was called Clean Robotics. We made a smart trash can that used AI and robotics to detect waste as you threw it away, and it sorts landfill from recycling from compost 300% better than the public. We started that in 2015, and over the years, my co-founder and I noticed that the industry really struggled with a handful of waste streams, and we kept coming back to batteries and electronic waste. And the conventional methods were using either they were going really, really hot, pyrometallurgy, or using really caustic chemicals like hydrometallurgy. And we thought there's got to be a better way. Why isn't anybody going cold? Because you can liberate a lot of the valuable things if you get cold enough. And we started having that debate maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and we kept trying to think of ways to like debunk it and like kill the idea because we kept coming back to it. And the more we argued about it, the less reasons we could find that that it wasn't doable. And eventually, we kind of realized that this is very, very doable. And we started seeing some really large battery recycling operations hit financial distress because of the enormous concentrations of capital and the enormous amounts of feedstock, the enormous amount of operational finances that it took to keep them afloat. And we thought we can make a system that uses cold instead of heat or hydro, uh, much more compact, much more capital efficient, much more OpEx efficient, and we can get close to wherever the batteries are. We don't have to like centralize and move everything to us. And eventually, the idea just seemed like it had legs when we started doing some market research and identifying regions where batteries were already being aggregated, and it kind of built the go-to-market plan itself.
We got a question for Charles, or anything else you want
Do
to
I have
add
a
in?
question for Charles? Yeah. Are you considering integrating your logistics into rail?
Yeah, 100%. We should have a chat about that.
I really have sincerely some ideas for that, and some relationships you guys should think about too. Like Republic Services is looking at, they have rail connected recycling centers and dumps already, and they're really looking to expand their revenue stream. So I think you guys could be a natural fit for them. So we should definitely talk.
That's exciting.
Our
Yeah.
job is done. We got a whole new business starting up right here. That's awesome.
Yeah. You said contact information.
Yeah.
Best way to get a hold of me, LinkedIn, Charles Yhap. You can also shoot me an email, charles@coldspark, one word, .tech.
I am Christopher.Smith@suntrain.co. We are also suntrain.co, and we are soon to be rebranding to the Transmission Company. So be on the lookout for that as well.